Okay, this is going to be a really short video summarising some of the key things we learned about the PPF and answering some tricky questions related to the PPF. There won't be any questions in this video, just some answers. So first thing, describe the difference between a shift in the PPF inwards and an economy working within the PPF. So when you're working within the PPF, you aren't using all your resources to your maximum potential. So you have the same productive capacity, your ability to produce hasn't changed, but you're not using all your land, labour and capital to its full capacity. So that might be indicative of there being a lot of unemployment or a lot of idle resources that aren't being used. When there is a shift in the PPF inwards, the economy's productive capacity is actually decreased. So the quantity and quality of land, labour and capital has actually gone down. That may be because a lot of people have passed away. It may be because of a drought, natural disaster, lots of emigration, a lot of people leaving the country. But basically your overall productive capacity has gone down. Hence, when there is a shift in the PPF inwards, the economy's ability, if all resources are fully employed, is reduced, whereas if an economy is working within the PPF, their ability hasn't changed, they're just not working, using their resources efficiently as possible. So one of them means their overall resources have actually fallen. The other one means they're not using all their resources to their full productive capacity. Okay, so from a classroom example, if people aren't working as hard as they can, that would be within the PPF. If we lose a few people or they migrate to another class, our productive capacity would go down. Explain why points within the PPF do not necessarily involve a trade-off. Okay, points within the PPF do not necessarily involve a trade-off because the economy is not using all their resources efficiently, and so in order to increase a certain good or service or produce more of a good or service, we don't need to sacrifice something else. We just need to work harder. Okay. Or answer 2, points within the PPF represent the economy is not working at its full productive potential and that there are idle resources available. That means that in order for more of a specific good or service to be made, we may not need to decide between producing more of one product or another. It might be just a matter of working harder. So we don't have to give up something to produce more. We just need to utilise more of our available resources. Explain with reference to 2 goods why the PPF is bowed outwards. The PPF is bowed outwards because not all resources are equally suited to the production of both goods and services. For example, if land that is more suited to growing apples is used for growing oranges, then the opportunity cost of changing the use of that land to produce apples instead of oranges is relatively low because the land was more suited to producing apples in the first place. Answer 2 is probably the best because it goes into more detail. The PPF is bowed outwards because the resources we have in our economy may sometimes not be suited to produce both goods and services. The more we try to produce of something, this is the most important sentence, the more we try to produce of something, the higher the opportunity cost. Because first we're going to dedicate resources that were suited to producing that, and then slowly we're going to use resources that aren't as suited to that type of good or service. For example, if we're good at producing pineapples but not apples, the more we try to increase the production of apples, the more pineapples we have to give up to produce apples because the opportunity cost becomes greater, and that's because we start to use resources that are less suited to that type of production. When would the PPF be diagonal or linear? The PPF would be diagonal, so what we mean by that is sloping downwards like that. When the economy's resources are equally suited to both types of goods and services, and therefore the opportunity cost is constant along the PPF. Okay? Explain using an example of 2 goods and services why opportunity cost is not constant. So we're talking about a bowed outwards PPF. Opportunity cost is not constant along the PPF because resources are not equally suited to both types of production. Producing robots and pizzas, we're producing 200 robots and 0 pizzas and decide to start making pizzas, we are first going to use all the resources like the chefs and capital resources best suited towards pizza and less suited to robots. The opportunity cost initially is quite low because resources are suited to pizza, and then eventually as we move along the PPF, we start to use resources like engineers that were better suited to making robots, and the opportunity cost grows, and therefore the PPF becomes, we sacrifice more. Explain the meaning of the term productive capacity. Okay, productive capacity is the maximum amount an economy can produce when all of its resources or factors of production are fully employed. Okay, this definition of productive capacity is really important. It's the maximum you can produce when all of your factors of production are fully employed. It's often represented by the outer point on the PPF, or if you're looking at an aggregate supply curve, which we do later in the year, the vertical section. Explain the difference between productivity and productive capacity. Okay, a tough question. Productivity is a measure of output per unit of input. So it's looking at how much output we're generating per unit of labour, land, labour and capital, or how efficiently we're using our resources to produce goods and services. So one is about output per unit of input. The other one is the point where production is at its maximum. So productive capacity is the maximum we can produce, assuming all our resources are used as efficiently as possible. As resources are fixed at any given point in time, production is limited by our resources. So our productive capacity is fixed at any particular point in time until we can grow our productive capacity. Explain why the PPF is both downward sloping and bowed outwards in nature. This is a question that students really struggled with from a past SAC. And it says use an example of two different products in your answer. So why is it downward sloping and why is it bowed outwards? They're two separate things. You need to address both parts of the question. The first thing, the PPF is downward sloping. What that means is why is the PPF shaping like either that or that? So why does it, basically what it's saying is why do we have to sacrifice one product whenever we make more of another product? And basically the PPF is downward sloping to signify the fact that we have limited resources. Every time we produce more of one good or service, we have to sacrifice the other one, and therefore there's an opportunity cost associated with every decision. If you think about it, if the PPF looked like this one here on the right-hand side, basically that's saying the more of one thing we produce, the more of the other thing we produce. That's going against the concept of relative scarcity. So the downward sloping nature, whether it's linear or bowed outwards, it's still downward sloping. That's just signifying the fact that when we produce more of one good or service, we sacrifice the other, producing some of the other good or service. So it's related to opportunity cost. It's not related to the opportunity cost changing. That's about the bowed out nature, but it's related to the fact that we actually have an opportunity cost when we produce more of one good or service. The PPF is bowed outwards to signify that resources are not equally suited to either type of good or service. We're using pizzas and robots as an example. Some resources are better suited to robots and some to pizzas. Therefore, the more of either good or service we produce, the higher the opportunity cost. So this one's about the opportunity cost changing along the PPF. The more we produce, the higher the opportunity cost because resources are less suited. The downward sloping nature is related to the fact that we have an opportunity cost when we produce more of a product, and bowed outward nature is the fact that the opportunity cost changes along the PPF. That's it.